With this past year of the pandemic, families spent more time than ever together. For some, this was a wonderful way to reconnect, and for others, it has caused some tension. And today we have Bob Silverstone, who will share ways to make marriages work even better. Who is Bob Silverstone? He has been a licensed psychologist in private practice for over 40 years, as well as a public school teacher and a counselor. He's written for numerous professional journals, been featured in a dozen award winning educational videos, and has appeared on many radio and TV programs. And Bob has been married to his high school sweetheart for almost 60 years, which means he knows what he's talking about.
Thanks, Jennifer. If I were a musician, which I'm not, I would not be a composer. There are only a certain number of Beethovens and Mozarts and Bachs, but I might be a conductor or an arranger. And that's what my hope is today, to put together some of the data, some of the research, some of the experiences that I've had in decades of working with couples. Very little of it is my own stuff, though there will be a little bit, but I like to share things I got from the wisdom of other people. And part of that is from a dear friend, lives in Weston, Juan Negroni. And Juan shared that at some point, as often happens with those of us who are married, someone asked him, Juan, how long have you been married? And his brilliant answer was, not long enough. I think that is absolutely marvelous. I also share with my clients two different approaches to living, one of which is the famous Gestalt prayer, Fritz Perls, 1969. I do my thing and you do your thing. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, and you are not in this world to live up to mine. You are you and I am I. And if by chance we find each other, it's beautiful. If not, it can't be helped. Really kind of talking about just living a life by oneself. An alternative was put together, Beyond Pearls, by Mr. Stubbs, and said, alternatively, if I just do my thing and you do yours, we stand in danger of losing each other and ourselves. I am not in this world to live up to your expectations, but I am in this world to confirm you as a unique human being and to be confirmed by you. We are fully ourselves only in relation to each other. The I detached from a thou disintegrates. I do not find you by chance. I find you by an active life of reaching out. Rather than passively letting things happen to me, I can act intentionally to make them happen. I must begin with myself, true. But I must not end with myself. The truth begins with two. Sometimes people say, I just want to do what I want to do. And my sense about that is, if you want to do what you want to do, be alone. And indeed, when we think about punishment, certainly people who are punished go to prison. And what, if you misbehave in prison, is the worst punishment that you can get? Solitary confinement, being by yourself. Now, as Jennifer indicated, I have been with my fabulous wife, Harriet, for almost 60 years. I think she is beautiful. She is very accomplished professionally. She's a great mother. She's a great grandmother. She's absolutely spectacular. However, she was not my first choice. Sophia Loren was my first choice. But peculiarly, she was not interested in a short Jewish boy from Brooklyn whose first job teaching in the New York schools paid him $4,800 a year, which comes down to about $100 a week or $20 a day or $3 an hour. And so it's not so much what it is that we're looking for, but very often what we bring to the table. And is it a just plain table? Or is it a table that has lots of character? I think of the Robert Schumann quote, which is the Robert Schumann, the composer. All my life, I promised myself I would not marry until I met the perfect woman. Unfortunately, when I found her, I discovered that she was looking for the perfect man. And so, what we're talking about is love. Um, Patch Adams, the marvelous physician who traveled around the world, who was documented in the film by Robin Williams, is reputed to have said, actually, he's not reputed. I heard him in a presentation. Raise your hand if you think there is anything more important than love. Sue Johnson is a couples therapist in Canada, and she's a Canadian proponent of John Bowles's attachment theory. And she says, we now know that love is in actuality the pinnacle of evolution, the most compelling survival mechanism of the human species. Not because it induces us to mate and reproduce. We do manage to mate without love, but because love drives us to bond emotionally with a precious few others who offer us a safe haven from the storms of life. We need emotional attachments with a few irreplaceable others to be physically and mentally healthy, to survive. Harville Hendrix is an author who has written a number of books and has gone around the country doing presentations. He wrote the book, Getting the Love You Want, Keeping the Love You Get. And a presentation that I was at, he said the following. He didn't say it exactly the way I'm about to, but it came across this way to me. And he said, we need to know that when we partner with an other, the other is an other different from us. They look different. They feel differently. They think differently. They've been raised differently. They are different from us. What most of us experience is projection. We say, well, this is who I am. This is what I like. This is the way I see the world. And I presume, I project that you feel the same way. Years ago in a Seinfeld episode, and I don't recall whether it was Elaine or Jerry who came and said, I met the perfect partner. He thinks the way I do, likes the same music, likes the same food, likes the same. Well, actually, I don't need that person because that's who I am. I want somebody who's different, who is adding something. And my sense is that opposites attract. I often see that people kind of on two sides of the seesaw, and even if one weighs 200 and one weighs 100, and they balance each other out. Ideally, they mentor each other. One of them is good in social affairs, one of them is good in bookkeeping, and they mentor. And the bookkeeper says, let me teach you how to do better bookkeeping. And the social person says, well, let me teach you how to socialize better. And they get closer together, so there's overlap. Unfortunately, sometimes people begin to move further and further apart, and they specialize. I just do the social, and I just do the logistical. And obviously, there are stereotypes in here. Stereotypes become stereotypes because they are common. But we need to remember that that's not everybody. Typically, women are seen as being best in communication, best at expressing their feelings. Certainly when couples come to therapy, it's typically the woman who brings in her male partner. And part of this presentation, because a good part of the research is heterosexually oriented, but that really is just a small part. And men are very often left with a feeling of, she's good at that. This is her bailiwick. What can I contribute? And it seems to me men are really good in compartmentalization. And maybe the poster boy for that is Bill Clinton, who, when he was dragged in front of Congress for impeachment, and they were talking about the semen stains on Monica's dress, and he went through all of that, and then he left Congress, and he went to negotiate with the Irish about Northern Ireland and Ireland. The ability to compartmentalize is something that we men seem to do well. And sometimes it's really helpful, and sometimes that is something. As women teach us to communicate better, we can instruct and help compartmentalize. I'm also reminded that we should not be judged. We are not as bad as our worst behavior. When I was 12, I visited a cousin out. I lived in Brooklyn, visited a cousin out in Greenport, Long Island. City boy going to visit the country boy. He took me to his local candy store, and I shoplifted. And I picked up comic book and a Three Musketeers bar. And I brought them home. Fortunately, his mother, my aunt, discovered the theft. She brought me back. I returned the stolen goods. She sent me home on the Long Island Railroad the next day. However, I no longer think of myself as a thief, as a shoplifter. We should not be judged by our worst behavior. We can get better, and we should not have that worst behavior held against us forever. Years ago, I was learning about what were called at that time the developmental tasks of adolescence. I've come to think about them as the developmental tasks of all of us. And certainly most of us would agree that the major challenge for adolescence is to develop a sense of identity. Who am I? The flip side of that is connectedness. Not just who am I, but who are you? What's it like for me to be a male? What's it like for you to be a male? What's it like for you to be female? What's it like for you to be gender nonspecific? What is it to be different? No man is an island. We're all connected to each other. Don't ask for whom the bell tolls. It tolls for all of us. So there's identity, there's connectedness, and the third one is a sense of power or a locus of control. Years ago, Wayne Dyer wrote a book, Pulling Your Own Strings. And that sense of being in charge of myself, I think, is really critical. Identity, connectedness, and power. Interesting. 2,000 years ago, Hillel wrote, if I am not for myself, then who will be? But if I'm only for myself, then what am I? And if not now, when? Identity, connectedness, and power. Very often in therapy, people will say, but I don't want to be selfish, Bob. And I think of it being self-ish. I think of the flight attendant who, when they go through the rigmarole, says at the end, and if we have a problem with oxygen and the masks fall from the sky, from the top of the plane, put yours on first. Because that's the only way. You need to survive in order to be able to help those people who you're traveling with. Perhaps the most famous, popular, current sex therapist right now is Esther Perel. She was born in Belgium. She lived in Israel for a while. She speaks, I think, half a dozen languages. And her famous first book was Mating in Captivity. And what she talks about is that in marriage, we all want safety, security, predictability, kind of the stereotypical 1950s picture. And we also want excitement and adventure and novelty. And so balancing both of those is really a challenge. Safety, security, and predictability, we want that. And we also want the other. And it takes maturity to be able to say, I need to maintain the safety because, and I'll come back to that later, how important that piece is. Dorothy Tenoff, who actually taught at the University of Bridgeport a number of years ago, wrote a fascinating book called Love and Limerence. Limerence was a word that she made up. And it's that sense of seeing somebody for the first time and going, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And then I see them again and it's, oh my goodness. And I said, would you like lunch with me? Oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And would you like dinner? Oh, yes, yes, yes. Could I kiss you? Oh my goodness, this is so exciting. Can we go home? Can we take our clothes off? Oh my God, this is so exciting. And if we're really lucky, then we get to be with that person for a long time. Perhaps we get to marry them. And we're just so excited about being with them. And after perhaps about 7 years, interesting, the 7-year itch, we notice that when we see them, when we eat with them, even when we take our clothes off, it's nice, it's lovely, but it's not, oh my goodness, oh my goodness. And people, Tenoff says people mistakenly believe that love has died. And what has happened is limerence / lust is no longer there. And that if we work on it, we translate that into love. And she says that love only lives in an environment of uncertainty. And if we're lucky, we become certain, or more inclined to become certain. No, that person really does love me. Helen Fisher, researcher, talks about the hormonal cocktail, that there are really hormones that are involved in our feelings toward other people. When we get really excited, limerence, lust, it's a dopamine, norepinephrine, and PEA. Those are the hormones that the body is excreting that makes us so passionate. And subsequently, there is oxytocin, which is the cuddling hormone. So we move from limerence or lust to love. I've often felt that the perfect musical instrument for marriage is the accordion, because the only way that it gets air in it is that it has to move apart and then get close together. And we come apart and we get close together. For years, I thought that I had invented this, and then I read an article where somebody else talked about that. Nonetheless, I think the accordion is a perfect metaphor. Most of us are familiar with the Serenity Prayer, devised first, we believe, by Reinhold Niebuhr, the religious theologist and philosopher, who said, God grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Not just people in AA, but I think all of us could pay close attention to that. Marty Seligman is a psychologist at the University of Pennsylvania. Decades ago, he was the president of the American Psych Association, did a lot of work on depression. He's the one who coined the phrase learned helplessness. But after a while, he said, we in therapy are focused too much on negativity. And he started positive psychology. And he talked about we know about post-traumatic stress disorder. And he said, but there's also post-traumatic growth. And the example he used is if you're in a bank and robbers come in, guns blazing, and people get injured or killed, and they leave, and afterwards, some number of people have post-traumatic stress. Oh my goodness, I have dreams about that. He said, but also, and in fact, more people have post-traumatic growth, not just in a bank robbery, but also in most wars. That I was in this dread, traumatic experience, this awful place, and I survived. And so he focuses, as I guess it was Bing Crosby in the 30s and 40s, accentuate the positive. He talks about in his book, Flourish, doing a gratitude journal. And the research was with elementary children, middle school, high school, college, military personnel. If you write down every day for a month 3 things for which you are grateful, we look outside and we say, it's raining. I'm grateful that that's going to feed into the plant life. I'm grateful for my 2nd grade teacher in complimenting me at one point. I'm grateful that I have food on the table. That if we just indicate 3 kinds of gratitude every single day for a month, that we feel better. We will feel better. He goes on to say that both happiness and grumpiness are contagious. And so if we want something out there, we need to demonstrate it ourselves. Ken Blanchard wrote the wildly popular business book, The 1 Minute Manager, good grief, 40 years ago. And in the inside front cover, he wrote, improve productivity, catch people doing something right. That many supervisors, or many of us have experienced somebody who's just looking for somebody to catch us doing something wrong. Catch people doing something right, tell them what it is that's good, and that will make both of you feel better. Arguably my favorite book about parenting by Thomas Gordon, PET. Actually, it is 51 years old. Talks about the importance of the word acceptance in relationships. He talks parents and children. I think of it in all relationships. And he says acceptance is like the fertile soil that permits a tiny seed to develop into the lovely flower it is capable of becoming. The soil only enables the seed to become the flower. It releases the capacity of the seed to grow, but the capacity is entirely within the seed. As with the seed, a child contains entirely within his organism or hers the capacity to develop. Acceptance is like the soil. It merely enables the child to actualize his potential. Back to the sense of we're all different from each other. We need to recognize that other people are different and that that's okay. We need to accept it. Years ago, I was at a presentation by Harriet Lerner, and she talked about two things. She talked about couples, and she started by talking about dysfunctional families. And she said, so let me be clear. Let me give you my definition of a dysfunctional family. A dysfunctional family is any family that consists of more than one person. And of course, after she said that, she had us all in the palm of her hands. And she said, and the best way to tell couples who have been successful in communicating is to have them stick out their tongue. Well, at this point, she had everybody on the edge of their seat. And she said, and look for bite marks. And if you see bite marks, they have figured out something important about relationships, that we need not just to say the right thing at the right moment, but to restrain from saying the wrong thing at the inappropriate moment. I think with other people, we have to assume good intentions. We're all clumsy. We all make mistakes. I said it before, I don't want to be judged by my worst behavior. I'm not sure that shoplifting at age 12 was my worst, but we're all clumsy. We all make mistakes. And I believe that we need to assume people are doing the best they can. We've all heard, I think, the phrase, would you rather be right or happy? And some of us work so hard to be right. One of the people I'm currently working with, actually, was in the middle of an increasingly hostile and agitated conflict with her love partner, her beau. And he was about to leave. And then in an inspired moment, she said to him, but what if it was my fault? And that sense of vulnerability changed the entire interaction between the two of them. He took his coat back off. He took the rest of the clothes back off, and it had a happy ending. I also remember years ago when I was working with a couple, and the woman said, they're in their 40s or so. Woman said, my mom's coming in to visit next week. Could I bring her in instead of my husband? And so the next week I was talking with mom and dad, with mom and daughter. And mom says, kid, 40-year-old kid, daughter, there's something I've always wanted to say to you. And the daughter brilliantly turns to her mother and says, is this going to improve our relationship? And the mom says, I'm not sure. And the daughter says, then why would I want to hear it? Seems to me we communicate for just a couple of reasons, either to say, fire, let's get out of here, or because I want to be helpful. I might even tell you you have ketchup on your shirt, not to make you feel bad, but so that you don't go outside with somebody who doesn't care about you as much as I do. And so I'll tell you something that may embarrass you a bit, but it really is for your best interest. Which brings me to the gurus of couples therapy, John and Julie Gottman. They're at the University of Washington out in Seattle, and they've been doing research for 25 years. They would put a couple in a hotel room. They would videotape them. They would not go in the bathroom. They would not go into the bedroom to see what it was that they were doing. And they determined originally that after a weekend, they could determine who would divorce and who would not. After having done this for a long time, they determined they could tell us after about 15 minutes or so that they were able to determine the masters and the disasters of relationships. And one of my favorite quotes is, "Talk to me like I was someone you love." They go on to say, and I was in a group of maybe 200 different therapists for a week, and they turned to us and they said, "You therapists, you lie. You lie to your couples. You tell them you can help them solve their problems. You can't." Two-thirds, 69% of the problems that couples experience are irresolvable because they're we're different people, part of a different value system. And they say choosing one set of problems, choosing one partner is choosing one set of problems. Choosing a different partner is choosing a different set of problems. But there are always problems. And that the 1/3 of the problems that are resolvable, they need to be addressed without expanding it to everything. Talk about that a little bit more. Seems to me that in many ways, these problems, these irresolvable 2/3 problems, are like, frankly, my experience of having a bad back. I will always have a bad back. But the goal is, how can I deal with it? I'll never deal with it once and for all, but how can I manage it? And I think that's the same thing with problems. They also talk about positive or negative, what they call positive or negative sentiment override. And it's much like a bank account. Each positive thing that we say to our partner puts in $1. Unfortunately, each negative thing subtracts $5. So that ratio is really 5 to 1. And they indicate that we need to be saying the positive things when things are going smoothly. And that we build up, if you will, a positive bank account. Again, positive sentiment override, such that if I have a good bank account with you and I say something neutral, your reaction is, "Oh, that was nice of Bob to say that." If I say something negative, it gets translated into only neutral because I've got so much goodwill. Obviously, the flip side of that is also true. And again, that we need to assume good intentions, that I didn't intend to step on your foot. I was clumsy, and that's what that was. And the problem is that when we attack each other, we get flooded with the hormones in the body that we cannot hear when the body gets flooded, and it takes fully, we cannot hear. 20 minutes. Most of us were brought up, count to 10, and then you won't feel so bad. No, they say for the adrenaline and for the cortisol to be reabsorbed back into the body after we have been angry, it takes fully 20 minutes. So we need to count to 60, 20 times. And now I'm ready to do some constructive problem solving. Flooding occurs. Daniel Goleman has, in the book Emotional Intelligence, says that the amygdala, kind of in the back of the head, the primitive brain, the seat of emotion, it kidnaps. I love that verb. It kidnaps the prefrontal cortex, the thinking part, and we cannot think clearly. Goleman also talks about when couples are in conflict with each other, almost invariably one of them will make a bid. Like, here's the kidnapping. One of them will make a bid, and the bid might say, "I'm sorry," or it might say, "Gee, do you see it's sunny outside?" Or, "You want to go for a ride?" Or, "Do you want to go for a run?" And the bid is really important. And what is equally important is that the partner respond to the bid and not ignore it. One of the worst things that happens is we become ignored. And so when somebody makes a bid, it's kind of bid and response. We need to say, "Amen. Thank you very much. I appreciate that." We need to respond. Again, for the Gottmans, they talk about behind every criticism, there is an implied wish or hope or dream. Darn it, why didn't you put the dishes into the dishwasher? Is the criticism. The dream, the hope, the wish is, I wish you would put dishes into the dishwasher. It just is so much easier to be heard, and we want to be heard. They talk about the four horsemen of the apocalypse. Again, we're with the Gottmans. And actually, they talk about five. And the first is a simple complaint. And the complaint might be, you don't put the dishes, sweetheart, I'm upset that you don't put the dishes into the dishwasher. That's the behavior. The complaint deals with the behavior. When you get into the four horsemen, it escalates, and the complaint is no longer about the behavior, but about the individual and its criticism. You don't put things in the dishwasher, you're a slob. Why don't you ever do? And not only that, you didn't put the clothes in the hamper. It's no longer the behavior, it's the individual, it's criticism. And as that suggests, most of us respond to criticism with a sense of defensiveness. We hold back. And actually, the Gottmans go on to say men, unfortunately, are even better, if that's the right word, more proficient, worse at defensiveness. It's kind of, I'm going to do this, I'm going to turn around, I'm not going to engage. And that leads to stonewalling. All right. And then the worst. And they say when you see too much of this, or even a little bit of this in a relationship, it suggests it's not going to do well, and it's contempt. And it doesn't even need a word. It's kind of rolling one's eyes. The Talmud says contempt is like spilling a person's blood. It is a violation of the contract of nurturance. My dear friend Eric Barron, who teaches at Columbia Business School and has taught management and marketing all over the world, says that very often when there are critical comments made, even though you don't see this, at the end of the sentence, there is a comma, stupid. So it's, why don't you put this stuff into the dishwasher? Comma, stupid. It's the tone of voice that suggests contempt, and we really need to be careful about that. Back at home, I got wisdom from my own family. And I think when my daughter was perhaps 8 years old, Amy must have done something. She must have done something at some point that I disapproved of. And I must have yelled at her. And she said to me, "Why are you yelling at me?" And of course, what I said, "Why am I yelling at you?" And she said, "I know, but why are you yelling at me?" Talk to me like I was someone you love. Love. Every book, every opera, every movie, every song, everything's about love. What's the best definition of love? For me, it is, with me, you will feel safe. And Maslow's hierarchy of needs talks about the importance of safety. Bottom line, physiological. We all need to eat, we need to sleep, we need to excrete. And after those bodily needs have been taken care of, we need safety, physical safety and emotional safety. And if a partner provides that, with me, you will feel safe. However, the flip side of that is that it makes us dependent and therefore vulnerable. And the vulnerability, when we kind of, if I hold my hands in close, it's really hard for you to hurt me, but it's impossible for us to embrace. If I hold my arms out wide, I'm very vulnerable, but it's the only way that people can embrace. With me, you will feel safe. Goldilocks is dead. I'm sorry. Everybody knows the Goldilocks story. The porridge is too hot, too cold, or just right. The chair is too hard, too soft, or just right. The bed is too big, too small, or just right. There is no just right. Whatever we do, we're going to make a mistake. And so we need to acknowledge that and not try to be perfect. I mean, we can try to be perfect, but we need to excuse ourselves and excuse other people for their imperfections. Despite the fact that I've been married for almost 60 years, I'm not a mind reader, nor is my wife, nor are any of us. Well, maybe a couple of us, but most people are not mind readers. And we need to ask, or we need to express what's going on. Years ago, there was a great essay in the New York Times, and it was by a woman who wrote, "What Shamu taught me about a happy marriage." And she said she noticed when she was out at SeaWorld that when they were training the whale, and of course this is historical now because we have recognized the inhumanity in doing that, but in training even a whale or a porpoise or a seal or whatever, they rewarded the positive and they ignored the negative. And so the writer said, I bet I could do that with my own husband. Acknowledge and appreciate the positive and ignore the negative. And ignoring something is the way in Psych 101, we're all taught that we get rid of behavior by simply ignoring it. One of my favorite quotes, Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel. With a name like that, I thought that he must be from the 14 or 1500s. No, he died just 20, 30 years ago. And he said, when I was young, I used to admire clever people. As I grow older, I admire kind people. And I think kindness, for me, is one of the primary values. A number of years ago, Gary Chapman wrote a fabulous book called The 5 Love Languages. And he said, if I spoke Spanish and you spoke Chinese, no matter how slowly or loudly I said to you, I love you, in a language that you don't understand, you would not understand it. He said the same thing happens with love. And he posits that there are 5 separate love languages. Some of us express love with words of affirmation. I love you. How does Bob feel about you? He loves me. How do you know? Well, he told me. Words mean something. Second group of people, yeah. You tell me you love me all the time, but you never touch me. You don't hug me. You don't embrace me. We don't have enough sex. But it's not just sex. I loved you to touch my cheek, to put your hand on my shoulder. That's physical touch. That demonstrates love. Another group of people say, yeah, you tell me you love me all the time. We have sex all the time, but you don't spend enough time with me. I want to go bicycle riding with you. I want to plant daffodils with you. Spending quality time, that's really a demonstration of love. A fourth group of people gives gifts. Of course I love you. Didn't I give you that brand new automobile? Or not the automobile, didn't I take you to dinner? Or not dinner, didn't I just write you a Post-it? And don't I do that with some regularity that says, I appreciate you? That some kind of a gift for many, many people is a demonstration of love. And finally, acts of service. Of course I love you. Didn't I take your car and get it serviced last week? And I know you love me because when I had laryngitis, you brought me hot tea with honey in it. It's acts of service that demonstrate love. And Chapman goes on to say that most of us partner with somebody who has a different love language. And rather than demanding that they speak our language, we need to learn their language. Not just that Barbara Streisand graduated in the same high school class as my wonderful wife, but that with Neil Diamond, they did that marvelous song, You Don't Bring Me Flowers. And there's this lovely piece in the book by John Gray, Men Are From Mars, Women Are From Venus. I think the author was arrogant. I think he's a male chauvinist. And I think he has some brilliant pieces in there. And he talks about a woman who had said to her husband, you don't bring me flowers anymore. And so the next day he brought her home flowers. which she promptly threw in the garbage, to which he said, "You asked me to bring flowers and I brought them." And she responded, "Yeah, but you only brought them because I asked you to." And John Gray says, "No, he brought them because he cares about you. If he didn't care about you, you could have stood on your head and he wouldn't bring them. He needed to be reminded." At the risk of being sexist, and I take that risk sometimes, particularly to attack my gender, men are excellent in courtship. We bring flowers, we pull out the chair, we open the car door, we make phone calls. We're not so excellent in maintenance. And it seems to me, and again, I understand that there's some sexism in there and there's stereotypes. And so I think it's true for both of us. We need to courtship all the time. We can never stop courting the people we care about. Attention must be paid. I love that phrase. I wondered where it came from, and I Googled it, and lo and behold, it's from Death of a Salesman by Arthur Miller. Pay attention to each of us. And then, of course, there are the dirty words, the absolute dirty words. And what makes them dirty is that they're absolute, and always and never are two of them. You never make the bed. Well, I did. Remember September 23rd? And then we start arguing whether it was September or October. And what the real message should be is twofold. Number one, the criticism, you don't make the bed often enough. Or I wish you would make the bed, to change the criticism into a wish or a dream or a hope. But to avoid the absolutes like always and never. Albert Ellis, the curmudgeonly psychologist who died within the last decade, talked about the necessity of replacing the word should. And should seems to me, it's Jiminy Cricket sitting on Pinocchio's shoulder saying, you should go to school, you should floss, you shouldn't eat so much candy. And Ellis says, can we change that into, it would be in my best interest to go to school, to do my homework, to floss my teeth, to eat more vegetables and so forth, to replace the word should, again, one of the dirty words. And because if we start to tell people shoulds, they tune us out, and we want to be heard. Behind every criticism, behind most criticisms, is an implied wish or a dream. From the criticism to the hope or the wish. Let's talk about sex, baby. As lust or limerence diminishes, love can take its place. And I don't think you have to be Jewish or Italian to kind of think about food with some regularity and compare lots of things. I've heard people talk about, oh, she is absolutely delicious, or he is just so wonderful. And to use food, and what we do with food, I may not be hungry. But if you put this enticing meal in front of me and invite me down, well, it's too good to turn down. And I think the same thing, after a period of time, the lust, the limerence diminishes, and it's no longer our genitals, our hormones, which say, I got to have some sex right now. But it's my heart, it's my head that says, I would like to share an erotic experience with you, both for me and for you. So we need to set the table. We need to invite people in. Mary Calderon, the originator of SICUS, the Sex Information Education Council of the U.S., said, how people behave toward each other in all matters, including the sexual, is the most important thing in the world. To quote Auntie Mame, life is a banquet, and most poor suckers are starving to death. Years ago, when one of our granddaughters was 8, we went to the Beardsley Park Zoo in Bridgeport, and they had a sign there which said, would you like to know how porcupines mate? And with our 8-year-old, we read, and what it said is, so the male porcupine approaches the female porcupine, they rub noses, and if the female porcupine is receptive, she puts down her quills, and he retreats to behind her, and they mate. So it's really important to do foreplay. And my sense is, when does foreplay start? 6 o'clock in the morning. Hello, sweetheart. Did you have a good sleep? Would you like a cup of coffee? What are you doing for your day today? That's foreplay. Hugh Prather wrote 40, 50 years ago the fabulous book, Notes to Myself. And he said brilliantly, no matter what we're talking about ourselves. And so if I say to you, or you said to me, Bob, that's a beautiful sweater that you're wearing. What it really means is, when the color of my sweater meets the retina, which is in your brain, and it triggers a reminder that I like that color. And so it would be more honest to say, I like the sweater that you're wearing. I think that's an attractive piece, rather than to put it on somebody else. No matter what we're talking about ourselves. This is the way I interpret the world. Getting close to the end. Pat Love and Terry Wheel, two people who wrote a couple of different books and articles, talked about a couple of things. Terry Wheel says the brain always errs in seeing more potential harm. This probably goes back to the African veld, when there was rustling behind the bush, and we said, either it's a tiger about to leap on me, or maybe it's somebody coming out to embrace me. No. Let me presume that it's going to be harmful, and I'm going to run away. And that men, William Pollock wrote a book on real boys, and he said, we men are brought up, and shame is one of the controlling elements. You fell off the bicycle, you get back on it. That kid stole your lunch money, you punch him out. And lots of the work that we try to do is to take care of the feelings of shame. Male underemployment and unemployment is the greatest predictor of domestic violence, because men see themselves as supposed to be the protector and the breadwinner. And when we can't do that, we experience shame and we strike out. When she feels unhappy, he feels inadequate. Brené Brown, who does TED Talks, talks about the transmutation of shame into grandiosity. I won't talk about politics in that. The Gottmans go on to say, therefore, all women, I think all people, but they say all women should use soft startups, be gentle to men. Certainly every supervisor is trained before you give negative feedback. I really like the lesson that you did, the principal says to the teacher. You did a lot of good things. These are the good things you did. And probably you could improve a little bit if you did this and this. That it lets us open our ears rather than close the ears. Women fear abandonment, and therefore men need to share power and not isolate. I love this quote, this statistic. The part of the brain that reads facial expressions in women is 9 times larger than in men. That women are even more visual in terms of faces than men are. Role modeling, what are the magic words? Please. Thank you. You're welcome. Alice Walker says, thank you is the best prayer that anyone could say. I say that a lot. Thank you expresses extreme gratitude, humility, and understanding. I think we need to acknowledge our mistakes. Years ago, I saw a couple whose middle school child lied a lot. And when we explored it, he thought that the parents were perfect, and therefore he needed to be perfect. And in order to, because he wasn't perfect, so he would lie. One of the most healthy things we can do is to acknowledge mistakes to ourselves, to those we love. We need to display affection. Periodically, I will ask couples, so what did you learn watching your parents? How did they express affection? And too often they would look at me and say, my parents express affection? No. I think we learned a picture is worth 1,000 words. We need to say, people need to express affection, and we need to display it. Maggie Scarf wrote a book called September Songs, and she compiled research on relationships. and a group of people who were unhappy and they got married, they got divorced, and a group of people who were unhappy, but they stayed together. And 5 years later, 1 in 5 who divorced were happier. 4 out of 5 were not. Of those who stayed together, 2 in 3 were happier. And her conclusion about this is that many stressors are external. The enemy is outside. I just had a tough time with my job. I got a bad supervisor. My mother is ill. My child is ill. The kid is about to go off to college. And over a period of time, those external stressors diminish, if not disappear. And finally, I think the brilliance of John Wooden, reported by Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, though he was not Kareem Abdul-Jabbar when he played for him, Lou Alcindor. A coach is someone who can give correction without causing resentment. Someone who can give correction without causing resentment is a coach. And I think that's one of the things that we can try to do with each other. I hope that this has been useful. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bob. This has been such an eye-opener. I appreciate you taking your time to share this with us. And thank you so much.